I arrived on time, as I always do when it comes to family. Never late, never careless. It was 6 a.m. sharp when I pulled up in front of the house I grew up in, heart quietly humming with excitement I had nurtured for nearly 2 years. This trip to Europe was meant to be a gift, a once-in-a-lifetime experience for my parents, paid entirely from my overtime hours and meticulous planning. But as my mother stepped out onto the porch, dragging her suitcase behind her, her face didn't carry the gratitude or joy I had expected. Instead, it was a smile tinged with guilt and something else. Deflection. Then I saw Monica, my younger sister, walking out from the front door with her own suitcase in tow. Her expression was calm, even smug, as if she'd won a prize she didn't earn. I stepped out of the car, confused, trying to keep my voice even. "What's going on, Mom? I thought this trip was for you, Dad, and me?" She gave a little laugh, the kind people use to soften a blow. "Well, Ellie, your father and I thought it'd be better if Monica went in your place. You've been working so hard lately, you deserve a break. But your sister, she really needs this right now." I froze. My father avoided my eyes as he handed over his suitcase. Monica gave a fake pout, then smiled and said, "Thanks for understanding, sis." I didn't reply. I didn't even blink. Because at that exact moment, something inside me cracked, not from anger or jealousy, but from the cold clarity of realization. No matter what I gave, how hard I worked, I would never come first in their eyes. Still, I drove them to the airport without a word. I gripped the wheel in silence while Monica babbled about the Eiffel Tower and Parisian boutiques. They didn't know it yet. But while they were preparing to enjoy the luxury I'd worked so hard to provide, I was already rewriting the ending of this story. I knew every booking, every password, every detail of this trip, and I knew exactly how to take it all back. My name is Ellie Whitmore, and for the past 2 years, nearly every spare moment of my life had been consumed with a single purpose: creating something extraordinary for the 2 people I believed I owed everything to, my parents. I had picked up extra shifts at the firm, cancelled vacations, skipped dinners, and poured every cent not spent on bills into a travel fund I guarded like a sacred promise. It wasn't just about a trip. It was about giving them something they never gave themselves. A chance to see the world beyond our sleepy corner of Ohio, to feel, if only once, what it was like to be celebrated and cared for in return. My parents had spent decades working hard, raising us with modest means, and I truly believed that this gift, a luxury week-long tour through Europe's most breathtaking cities, would be something they would treasure, a gesture that would finally make them proud of me in a way they rarely expressed. I had handpicked every detail, from private museum tours in Vienna to a river cruise along the Danube, and booked rooms in charming 5-star hotels that overlooked cobblestone streets and flower-covered balconies. It was meant to be a dream come true, not just for them, but for me too, because I longed for time alone with them, away from the constant presence and needs of my younger sister. Monica had always been the center of attention, the storm around which everyone else learned to navigate. Where I was quiet and disciplined, she was impulsive and dramatic, often reckless with money and emotions, but endlessly excused because of her sensitive spirit or rough patch. Phrases I heard far too often while watching her waste second chances I had never even been offered once. And yet, no matter how many times she burned bridges, someone, usually our parents, would be there with buckets of water and open arms, expecting me to understand, to help, to forgive. I did, over and over, even when it came at my expense. When I was passed over for promotions because I had to leave work early to handle Monica's latest breakdown, When my parents asked me to co-sign a loan so she wouldn't ruin her credit, again. Or when they forgot to attend my art exhibition because Monica had totaled her car that morning. I swallowed the disappointment like medicine, bitter but necessary. Because family, I told myself, means sacrifice. Because one day I believed they would see me, not just as the dependable one, the fixer, the adult who never asked for anything, but as a daughter worthy of their pride, their appreciation, their love. That's why the trip meant so much. It was my quiet plea for connection, for recognition, not through grand speeches or guilt, but through shared experience. I imagined us laughing over fresh pasta in a Tuscan vineyard, wandering through the old streets of Prague, watching the sun set over the Seine in Paris. I thought that maybe, just maybe, in that rare setting where none of us had to solve anyone else's problems, they might finally see me for who I really was, not just their helper, but their daughter, their equal. But standing in that driveway, watching Monica slip into my seat without the slightest hesitation, while my mother smiled as though this was some small inconvenience I could easily get over, I felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I understood. The truth hit with cold precision. No matter what I did, no matter how much I gave or planned or sacrificed, I would always come second. Monica didn't need the trip. She needed validation. And once again, they had handed it to her, neatly packaged in the form of my years of effort and love. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to reconsider. I simply nodded, loaded their luggage, and got behind the wheel. But inside, something fundamental in me changed. The weight I had carried for so long, the burden of being the strong one, the reliable one, the invisible one, began to slip. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place that, it seemed, had never truly been mine. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop asking for it. The drive to the airport was quiet in the way only emotional betrayal can make a space feel. Not silent, exactly, but filled with tension so thick I could almost taste the bitterness of it on my tongue. Monica, blissfully unaware or simply choosing not to care, filled the car with the sound of her own excitement. She went on about Paris as if she were some seasoned traveller instead of someone who couldn't navigate her way through a grocery list without asking for help. She chatted about TikToks she'd seen, about berets and croissants and shopping on the Champs-Élysées, all while I stared straight ahead, my hands locked on the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My mother responded to Monica's questions with soft chuckles and casual reassurances. "We'll figure it out when we get there," she said, as if I wasn't even present in the car, as if I hadn't spent the past 24 months orchestrating every last detail of this trip so they wouldn't have to figure anything out at all. And my father, always the quiet one, always the man who avoided conflict by simply pretending it wasn't happening, sat in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery, only breaking the silence once to mumble, "Thanks for driving us, Ellie. I know this probably feels unusual." Unusual. That was the word he chose. As if this were some minor logistical hiccup, a scheduling error, not the complete erasure of everything I had built for us. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, my voice calm but tight. "That's one way to put it, Dad." He didn't answer. He just shifted in his seat, the weight of his discomfort far too little, far too late. At one point, Monica leaned forward, resting her chin on the back of the front seat like a child asking for ice cream. "You're not mad, right? I mean, it's kind of amazing of you letting me go. I could never afford something like this on my own." Her voice was coated in syrupy gratitude, but her eyes sparkled with the smugness of someone who had, once again, gotten exactly what she wanted without doing a thing to earn it. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "Of course," I said, managing a thin smile. "Enjoy the trip." By the time we reached the drop-off zone, I could feel my patience thinning like worn thread. I helped them unload their luggage, my hands moving mechanically, my face unreadable. My mother gave me a warm hug, as though nothing unusual had happened, thanking me for understanding, while Monica rolled her suitcase inside with a careless wave and a final grating, "You're the best, Ellie." I didn't respond. I didn't even watch them disappear through the terminal doors. I simply returned to the driver's seat and sat there for several minutes, frozen. I replayed every word they had said on a loop. "You're always working. She needs this more. Don't make this a big deal." And with each repetition, it sliced deeper. All the nights I spent skipping meals to meet project deadlines. All the weekends I turned down invitations so I could save for this one gesture of love. Reduced to a footnote in my sister's latest journey of healing. But I wasn't going to beg for what should have already been mine. I wasn't going to cry in that car or call a friend to vent or drive home and swallow it like I always had. Not this time. Instead, I marched into the house, opened my laptop, and logged into every travel account I'd used for the past year. One by one, I pulled up the bookings, the elegant hotel rooms, the private drivers, the guided tours, the dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants, and began clicking cancel. Each confirmation email that landed in my inbox felt like a brick lifted off my chest. The tightness in my throat began to ease. For once, I was no longer the one smoothing over chaos for others. I was the one creating it, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. They had chosen Monica. They could experience Europe with Monica's resources, Monica's skills, Monica's non-existent planning. Not mine. The calls started as soon as their plane touched down in Frankfurt. I ignored them at first, letting the phone buzz and vibrate and chirp as message after message came in. My mother's name lit up the screen over and over, followed by increasingly panicked texts. "Ellie, what's going on? The hotel won't check us in. Call me now. This isn't funny. Fix this." A quiet laugh escaped me. Not bitter, but hollow. They genuinely thought I would rush in and fix everything, just like always, that I would drop everything to rescue them from a mess of their own making. It never occurred to them that the fixer might finally have stopped fixing. Even Monica chimed in with a voicemail so entitled, I deleted it before she finished her first sentence. The girl who took my place on the trip I created had the audacity to call me petty. The irony was rich. Eventually, I answered, not out of guilt, but because I was tired of the noise. My mother's voice came through in a rush of fury. "Ellie, what did you do? The hotel says the reservation is cancelled. None of the tours are booked. What on earth is going on?" "I cancelled everything," I said, plainly, as though informing her of a weather report. There was a stunned pause, and then a hiss. "Why would you do that?" I let the silence stretch before responding. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe because you decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned and paid for. Maybe because you thought replacing me wouldn't have consequences." "We thought you'd understand," she snapped. "Understand what, Mum? That Monica's stress matters more than my 2 years of sacrifice. That my efforts mean nothing compared to her latest rough patch. Number I don't understand. And I don't care to." I ended the call and powered down my phone, letting the silence settle like fresh snow. Heavy, quiet, strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one expected to make it all better. And for once, I wasn't sorry. After ending the call, I didn't scream or cry or crumble the way they might have expected. Instead, I sat in my living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me the only sound breaking the stillness. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe without obligation. The weight of pretending, of constantly stepping in to save others from the consequences of their own choices, began to loosen its grip. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the steam fog my glasses and blur the vision of the woman I'd been for years. The fixer, the peacemaker, the daughter who gave and gave, always quietly, always without thanks. The silence that followed was not an accident. It was deliberate, and it was mine. I kept my phone off for the remainder of the day, then the day after, and then another. I cleaned my home not out of routine, but out of ritual, reclaiming space that had always felt like a staging ground between crisis calls. I folded laundry without distraction, swept the porch with the care of someone restoring something sacred, and listened to music that made me feel grounded instead of obligated. But the quiet was never meant to last, and by the third day, curiosity, or perhaps the need to affirm my boundaries, got the better of me. I powered my phone back on, and within seconds, the screen lit up with a tidal wave of alerts. Missed calls, voice messages, and texts that stacked one after another like accusations waiting to be answered. My mother's messages came first, each one escalating in urgency and outrage. "You've gone too far. Your sister is in tears. Your father is furious." Then Monica's, brittle and childish. "This is so petty. Why are you making this such a big deal? Just fix it, Ellie." And finally, my father, always quieter, but no less manipulative in his tone. "We need to talk. This isn't right." I didn't reply. I simply stared at the screen, my thumb hovering for a moment before I turned the phone face down and walked away. It wasn't about punishing them, and it certainly wasn't about revenge in the shallow sense of the word. I wasn't trying to get even. What I was doing was protecting something far more fragile and far more valuable: my peace, my dignity, and what remained of my self-respect. Later that evening, the calls resumed, and for reasons I can't quite explain, I picked up. My mother's voice barreled through the line, thick with frustration and dripping in entitlement. "This isn't funny anymore, Ellie. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I took a sip of tea, letting her words swirl through the air before I answered. "Embarrassing?" I said slowly, my voice calm. "You think this is embarrassing? Try spending years planning something from love and sacrifice, only to be told, at the last minute, that your presence isn't even required." "Stop being dramatic," she snapped, her temper flaring through the receiver. "Monica needed this more than you did." "Then she can figure it out," I said firmly, each word deliberate. "You made your choice, Mom. You wanted her instead of me, and now you can live with that. But what you won't do is ask me to pay for it." There was a pause, a rustle, and then Monica's voice emerged from the background like a splinter under skin. "Mum, just hang up on her. She's being impossible." That was the moment I knew they still hadn't grasped it. They still believed I was bluffing, still clinging to the hope that I'd cave like I always had. "I hope you enjoy your trip," I said, my voice cool and even. "Oh, wait. That's right. You can't. Because it wasn't yours to begin with. It was mine. And now, it's nobody's." Before she could respond, I ended the call and turned my phone off once again, this time placing it in the drawer of my nightstand, and walking away with a stillness I hadn't felt in years. There was no triumph in that moment, only a solemn sort of clarity, the kind that settles in your bones when you finally stop justifying your own pain for the sake of keeping the peace. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar. No calls, no demands, no guilt hanging like smoke in the room. I sat on the back porch most mornings, watching the light move across the sky, sipping coffee without the weight of anyone else's expectations dragging behind every thought. I worked in the afternoons, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because for once, my energy belonged to me and no one else. I was not angry in the way people assume anger looks. I was not shouting or throwing things or slamming doors. I was angry the way oceans are angry, steady, deep, and with a tide that had finally turned. They could beg. They could blame. They could call it petty or cruel or not like me. But the truth was this. For the first time in my life, I was finally acting like me. And I wasn't going back. 3 days passed in that strange, sacred quiet, not entirely free of anger, but no longer drowning in it either. I kept my phone off and my voice to myself, refusing to be pulled back into the noise of blame and guilt they had always used to reel me in. But on Sunday afternoon, as the sun filtered softly through the kitchen window and the clock ticked past 3, my phone rang again. And this time, for reasons I didn't fully understand, I answered. It was my father. And the moment I heard his voice, heavy with weariness and the careful phrasing of someone who'd been sent to negotiate peace, I knew this wasn't a conversation he wanted to have. It was one he had been pushed into. Ellie, he began, your mum wanted me to call. She thinks maybe you'd be more open to talking with me. I didn't respond right away, just leaned back in my chair and waited. He took the pause as permission to continue. Look, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. Your mother's upset, Monica's beside herself, and honestly, the whole trip has been a disaster. But you're better than this. That phrase, so casual, so insidious, slid under my skin like a splinter. Better than what, Dad? I asked, my voice steady but low, like a current building beneath calm waters. Better than standing up for myself? Better than refusing to be walked over again? That's not what I meant, he said quickly, the words tumbling out in defense. It's just, you've always been the reasonable one, the one who held everything together. This isn't like you. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could catch it. No, it's not, I agreed. It's not like me, because I finally stopped twisting myself into knots to make things easier for all of you. I finally stopped pretending that it didn't hurt every time you asked me to sacrifice a little more so Monica could fall apart without consequence. He was quiet on the other end, and for a moment, I thought maybe something had gotten through. But then came the familiar turn, the redirection that always landed the blame back at my feet. You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair? And there it was. Fair? I repeated, each syllable sharper than the last. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you both smiled in my face while letting Monica take my place on a trip I spent years planning? Was it fair when I loaded your luggage into a car you barely acknowledged I was driving, while you laughed and talked about sightseeing without even realizing I wasn't part of the we anymore? We didn't mean it that way, he muttered. We just thought Monica needed it more. Of course you did, I snapped, my composure cracking just enough to let the fire in. You always think she needs more attention, more help, more understanding. And what do I get? Expectations? Silence? A pat on the back for not making waves while you pour everything into keeping her afloat. You think I don't notice? You think I haven't spent my entire adult life being the buffer between her chaos and your shame? I could hear his breath catch, and for the first time in this entire mess, I sensed a shift. Not guilt, perhaps, but discomfort deep enough to register. Ellie, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't need you to say anything, I replied, calmer now, almost cold. I need you to understand that I'm done. I'm done being the afterthought, the solution, the built-in safety net. I won't apologize for finally putting myself first, and I won't rescue you from the fallout of the decision you made. There was silence on the line, not the kind that asks for grace, but the kind that follows a door quietly closing. I let it linger for a breath, then two, before adding, "Goodbye, Dad." I ended the call and set the phone gently on the counter. My hands trembled, not from fear or anger, but from release. The tremor of someone who has held a weight for too long and has finally let it fall. That afternoon, I didn't cry, and I didn't pace the room replaying what I should have said. Instead, I made myself a fresh cup of tea and walked outside, sitting in the shade of the old maple tree in my backyard, the one my parents had planted decades ago, never imagining their daughter would one day sit beneath it, finally free from needing their permission to feel worthy. For once, I felt no urge to fix, to explain, or to smooth the edges of their disappointment. I had spent a lifetime shrinking my pain to accommodate theirs, but not anymore. This was my boundary, and it would hold. In the days that followed, something inside me shifted, not all at once like a thunderclap, but gradually, like the tide retreating after a storm, leaving behind a shoreline I had never truly examined. With my phone still off, and the silence around me undisturbed, I began to move through my home as if I were learning it for the first time. No longer a backdrop to my exhaustion, or a holding pen for responsibilities I never asked for. I reorganized closets that had been neglected for years, cleaned out drawers filled with forgotten receipts and expired obligations, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I found small pockets of joy in the ordinary. The hum of a kettle, the creak of a floorboard, the way afternoon light moved across my kitchen walls. But the stillness, no matter how welcomed, was never going to last forever, and by the end of the week, I knew the next confrontation was inevitable. I didn't expect them to return early, but I wasn't surprised when they did, nor was I shocked to see the worn expressions on their faces as they pulled into the driveway, eyes tired not just from travel, but from realizing how completely unprepared they were to handle things on their own. I was already sitting on their front porch when they stepped out of the cab, sipping coffee, and watching them drag their suitcases across the cracked pavement, like survivors of a trip that had turned into something far more humbling than a vacation. Monica spoke first, her voice sharp and brittle. "Well, I hope you're happy." I didn't stand. I didn't even blink. Happy about what? "Our trip was a mess," my mother snapped, throwing her hands up as if that should have explained everything. "We had to stay in cheap hotels, the food was awful, and none of the tours were confirmed. We were turned away from half the places you booked." "I'm sure that was disappointing," I said evenly, taking another sip of coffee. "But you wanted Monica to go. I figured you'd enjoy some bonding time." "That's not the point," she said, her tone rising in frustration. "You set us up to fail, and you know it." "No," I replied, setting the cup down beside me. "I planned a beautiful trip for the three of us, every detail, every experience, and I did it with care, with love, and with the hope that we'd create something meaningful together. You're the ones who decided to cut me out of it. I simply chose not to let you enjoy what you were never meant to take without me." My father stepped in, his voice quieter but no less pointed. You didn't have to cancel everything, Ellie. That was extreme. I met his gaze without hesitation. Was it? You made a decision, and I made one in return. If Monica needed that trip so badly, maybe she should have planned it herself. Monica rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. You're so dramatic. It's just money, Ellie. That word, just, scraped against every sacrifice I had made, every moment I'd stayed late at work or said no to myself so I could give to others. I stood slowly, not out of anger, but from the need to reclaim the space between us. You think this was about money? I asked, my voice steady. This was about being seen, about being appreciated for once instead of being expected to quietly serve. You've all gotten used to me absorbing the impact, to me being the backup plan, the fixer, the invisible glue. But this time, I chose myself. They didn't speak. For a moment, even Monica had the good sense to look away. I picked up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and turned toward my car. I'm glad you made it back safely, I said. But if you're waiting for things to go back to how they were, don't. The drive home felt different this time. Not because I was leaving anything behind, but because I wasn't carrying it with me anymore. When I got back, I brewed a fresh cup of tea and sat on my own porch, the one that overlooked the garden I had kept alive even when everything else felt like it was withering. I replayed the scene in my head, their shock, their silence, their dawning understanding that I would no longer bend to keep the peace. And for the first time in years, I felt weightless. In the days that followed, I didn't block their numbers, but I also didn't respond right away. I answered on my time, not theirs. I didn't rush to smooth things over or apologize for standing firm. I journaled each morning, not to vent, but to rediscover my own thoughts before they were filtered through someone else's need. I redecorated the living room, replacing hand-me-down furniture with pieces that finally felt like mine. I made space, not just physically but emotionally, for the version of myself I'd kept buried beneath obligation. One night, I opened the spreadsheet where I had meticulously planned every day of that abandoned trip. And for the first time, I didn't feel a pang of regret. I felt freedom, not just from the trip itself, but from the years I spent trying to earn affection I should have been given freely. I closed the document and opened a new one, this time titled My Trip. It wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about honoring the person I was becoming. A few weeks later, I booked a solo flight to Italy. I didn't copy the original itinerary. I made new plans that matched my rhythm, my interests, and my desires. When I arrived in Florence, I didn't think about what they might say or feel. I wandered down sun-drenched streets, sat in quiet cathedrals, tasted wines I couldn't pronounce, and laughed with strangers in tiny cafes that didn't care where I came from or who I had been trying to please. One evening, sitting on a balcony that overlooked the Arno River as the sky melted into twilight, I wrote a simple sentence in my journal. I am no longer asking to be chosen. I have chosen myself. And it was enough. When I returned home from Italy, I didn't come back with souvenirs meant to impress or stories designed to earn envy. I returned with something quieter but far more lasting, clarity. I unpacked slowly, folding clothes that still carried the scent of foreign cafes and warm linen, and placed each item where it belonged, not just in my house, but in this new chapter I had begun to write for myself. My body was tired in the best way, not from carrying other people's burdens, but from finally living on my own terms. A few days later, my phone rang again, this time with a call from my mother. There was no demand in her voice, no fury or manipulation, only a softness I hadn't heard in years. "Hi, Ellie." she said, her tone almost hesitant. How was your trip? It was amazing, I answered truthfully, keeping my tone neutral but not cold. I didn't owe her anger, not anymore. I had already spent enough years building walls with silence. Now I was building boundaries with grace. There was a pause, as if she were searching for the right words. And then she finally said, "We've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe we didn't handle things the way we should have." I didn't rush to fill the space. I let it breathe. "Poorly," I replied after a moment. "You handled it poorly. You replaced me without asking, dismissed my effort as if it were disposable. And when I chose to respond with dignity and reason, you called it petty." She sighed, and I could hear the weariness behind it, not just from this moment, but from decades of never being challenged. "Your father and we didn't realize how deeply it would hurt you. And Monica, she regrets a lot of things too." I didn't bite into that thread. It wasn't the time. "This wasn't just about a trip," I said, my voice quieter now but firm. "It was about a pattern. It was about being expected to be the strong one, the silent one, the one who gave without limits, and watching that being taken for granted over and over." "I understand," she whispered, and for the first time, I wondered if she really did. "I hope so," I replied. "But it's going to take more than words. I'm not ready to come back into the same dynamic we had before. I need to see something real, not just apologies, but change." "You will," she promised. "We'll give you space. We don't want to lose you." The call ended, not with a resolution, but with the beginning of something quieter. A mutual acknowledgement that healing wasn't a switch to flip, but a path to walk, slowly, deliberately, with humility and respect. I set my phone down and returned to my journal, not to vent this time, but to write about what I had learned. That it's not cruel to walk away from what wounds you, and that sometimes love, true love, must first grow out of distance and truth. In the months that followed, I didn't rush to fix anything. I answered calls when I felt ready, visited when I had the emotional room to give, and spoke honestly when old habits tried to sneak back in. I focused on rediscovering myself, not the daughter, not the sister, but the woman I had almost forgotten I was. I signed up for a photography class I'd always put off. I hiked new trails with people who didn't know my history. I sat with discomfort when it rose, and I didn't chase resolution if it wasn't offered with sincerity. One afternoon, I sat on my porch, the same swing where I used to sip coffee, while wondering what else life might hold beyond the walls of expectation. And I realized I no longer wondered. I knew. Because I was living it. Not in grand cinematic declarations, but in small, powerful acts. Saying no without guilt, choosing peace over performance, and no longer waiting to be chosen by people who only saw my value when it served their need. And as for my family, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll find our way back to something healthier. Maybe we won't. But either way, I've stopped tying my worth to that outcome. I'm not the family fixer anymore. I'm just Ellie. And that, finally, is enough. If this story moved you, or reminded you of your own journey of choosing peace over pleasing others, leave a comment below and tell us your story. And if you're still on your path, know this: you are allowed to choose yourself. Subscribe for more stories that honor strength in silence, dignity in boundaries, and the quiet power of walking away.